Welcome back to Lafayette Returns, an historic Rockford podcast leading up to Lafayette Day at Rockford, Monday, July 28th, 2025. I'm your host, Lisa Landis-Blowers. We are hitting the books, going to French class today with Associate Professor of French and Chair of the Language Studies Council at Franklin and Marshall College, Carrie Landfried. Thank you, Carrie, for agreeing to help us with the language as we prepare for Lafayette's visit. And I need help. I am not gifted in learning languages, and I do believe it's a gift. Way back in the day, my middle and high school here in Lancaster did not offer French, so I took German, and I can't speak that either. But before we dive into that, I would love to hear about your journey to the language and F&M.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to talk about Lafayette and French and Franklin and Marshall. It's funny you talk about having a gift for languages. I didn't know that I had a gift for languages. I was a kid who loved to play teacher and who loved to read. So I've been able to combine those interests by becoming a professor of literature. I think that could have been a lot of different kinds of literature, but different happy accidents in my life led me to French. You said, they didn't offer French, you took German. Well, I went to school in the Boston area, and the choice was Spanish or French. And I had an older cousin who had studied French. And so, sometimes it's a small thing that tips you in favor of one thing or another. Her parents had an apartment in Switzerland. They actually lived in Saudi Arabia at the time. It's a long story, but they would go to this place in Switzerland. And so there were a few little things in my life that just sort of leaned French a little bit. In my town, outside of Boston, there was a French family, and I started babysitting for them and their kids. And then they invited me, once they returned to France, to come spend a summer as an au pair. So in high school, I went and spent a summer with them. And I think that's really the tipping point, because I was immersed in it. I was there to speak English with the kids and help them keep up their English, but the rest of everyday life and shopping and being at family events and dinners was just immersion in French. Coming back from that in high school and then having a great experience with an exchange just led to going to college, and I went to Grinnell College, another small liberal arts school that's in Iowa. Decided I wanted to study abroad and do a full year abroad, so being a French major made that more possible. And so then that experience, and then I was a teaching assistant in France after that experience, and then decided to do graduate school at NYU. Began in Paris, because you could do the master's year in Paris. I've been sort of doing ping pong back and forth between France and the US kind of ever since. I think I've calculated a good 9 years in France. I got first a visiting professor position at Goucher College. I was there for 3 years before the tenure track position here at Franklin and Marshall, and now this is my 15th year. It's very hard to say that because, I feel so old all of a sudden. I've been here so long.
That is wonderful. Congratulations. Carrie, we are eager to learn from you. Can we start with the basics? How do French people greet each other? And I'm assuming this might differ where you are in the country. I got myself in trouble one time in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. I thought Guten Morgen would work for good morning, and that community had a different word to say good morning.
If you're meeting someone for the first time, bonjour is appropriate in most settings. You can say bonsoir if it's the evening. I think what really differs region to region in France and in Switzerland as well is you also often kiss people on the cheeks, and that's called la bise. The number of times you kiss depends on where you are. 2 is fairly typical, but in parts of the south of France, it's 3. And the region in Western France where I was a teaching assistant, English teaching assistant, it was 4. If you show up somewhere and there are 15 people to say hello to, and you are kissing each of them 4 times on the cheek, it's going to take a minute. At the same time, it's kind of lovely because there's a personal and individual greeting with each person, right? You can imagine showing up to a place with 15 people here. Maybe a wave and just, hi, everyone, is what you would say. And you will also do the same thing and kiss them when you're leaving. So there's also, again, that sort of attention to that. Now, if anyone is listening and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to kiss everybody on the cheek, you can shake hands. They can also understand that that's not part of your culture. But if it's someone that is a friend or is introducing you to a friend or an extended family member and things like that.
So how many times do we need to kiss Lafayette?
This is a tradition that we think dates way, way back, but would fall out of favor and back into favor. So I don't think that in the very late 18th and early 19th century, that was part of the custom. I do think he would probably kiss a woman's hand. He's a marquis, so he's part of the aristocracy. And so I think that in greeting people, there would be more bows. And again, for a woman, like a kissing of the hand, taking off his hat, because of course he'd be wearing a hat. But I don't think that Lafayette would have been, maybe with very, very close family members, but I don't think in the setting that you'll be meeting him in, that the kissing of the cheeks, the bees, would be part of it.
When Lafayette arrives, I do not want to offend. Are there certain phrases that I should avoid when greeting?
That's a good question. I think mostly it's the things that I think you should do. And one thing I tell my students, and they think I'm joking, but I'm not, you can never be too polite in French. The basics that you want to learn are how to greet somebody. So again, that would be bonjour. That's the most simple thing. But if you really want to be polite, it's bonjour and a term of address, like bonjour monsieur, right, for a man, okay. Bonjour madame, for a woman who you're assuming is of marrying age, whether or not she's married. Bonjour mademoiselle, if it's a young woman. He's a marquis, so bonjour monsieur le marquis would be even more polite in that case. And you can always keep doing that. So then even, if you're saying goodbye, au revoir, monsieur, adding that onto it. If you're thanking somebody, if you're, saying please, all of those sorts of words. So I tell my students that just a trip to a bakery in France to buy a baguette, it would not be unreasonable to say madame 4 times in that exchange with the woman working at the bakery, because first you're saying bonjour madame, and then you're telling her what you would like, and then she hands it to you and you say merci madame, and then as you're leaving the store, you don't just walk out without saying anything, so you say, au revoir or bonne journée, which is have a good day. Adding the term of address to it is usually helpful. So I guess the thing not to do is just to be very curt with somebody, say hello, but not say goodbye. That's a big no-no, right? If you're eating in a restaurant, when you leave, you should say goodbye to your server. You should say, if there's a host, you should say goodbye to that person. They're likely to say goodbye to you as well. And they might take it, if you leave without saying anything, that you were not satisfied and you were not happy with your meal. Now, maybe you weren't, but if you were, you're going to be giving them the wrong message.
Any particular greetings during Lafayette's time that may have fallen out of favor?
It's a good question. I am not really a historian of the French language. I'm kind of skirting your question, but one thing I do know is that French was not yet everywhere in France at that time. So there were multiple regional languages. And Lafayette, I would imagine, and I think it has been documented, learned French and learned Latin. That would be typical for any young man of the aristocracy. And in his day, there was an effort to start unifying the country around French. He lived through Napoleon, and Napoleon very famously centralized a lot of aspects of France, had a single unit of measure before Napoleon. Different places had different units of measure, and made big efforts to make what has become French today, standard French today, which was one of the dialects, the language of the country. Now, that might sound like a good idea. Keep in mind that means that a lot of regional languages were being suppressed in that case, and many of them have disappeared, and only lately, in some cases, have there been some efforts to revive them. Another thing you'll want for greeting the Marquis is, once you have introduced each other, you acknowledge that by saying essentially that you are delighted, right? They're very pleased to meet them, are delighted. So you're going to want to say enchanté once the introductions have been made. And that has stuck through to this day. So I think greetings have been fairly standard, with the exception, as I said, of not kissing on the cheek back in his day.
Any movies or songs that might help us learn the language? I'm a film lover, and much of what I pick up has been from French films like Tell No One, one of my favorites, and an all-time favorite, the Three Colors trilogy. Now, lots of music in those films, especially in blue, but I'm able to pick up words, especially with subtitles. Even Poirot has helped.
First of all, it's great. I mean, I don't hear people referencing the Three Colors trilogy these days, and it's a fantastic. I have the DVDs, I think. So I would say, in a way, you can't go wrong. And one thing over my lifetime and over my career, just seeing the internet explode with opportunities to access French language. I mean, and not just French, but all the main streaming platforms now have original content these days. While I don't get to the movies that often in the States anymore, I still go a fair amount in France. There's just a different culture around the movies, and it's much cheaper, which helps. Netflix will had Lupin, which was a very popular series, and I strongly recommend it. It's just fantastic acting and a great storyline, particularly the first season. There's another really sort of fun series on Netflix called Call My Agent. The title in French is very different. It's 10%. It's about a talent agency, and each episode features a real French actor or actress playing themselves, who's represented by this talent agency. And so then the actors playing the talent agents are, helping them with different situations they're in on a film set or things like that. So given that you can stream all of these things, also, if you have some knowledge of French, you're learning it, you can put the French subtitles on. Sometimes reading along as you're listening to it can help, because spoken French and written French are very different. There are a lot of silent letters in French, which can make it hard to learn how to pronounce the words or to understand them when you're hearing them. But like I said, with those shared origins of a lot of the words, if you're reading along, you might pick things up. Apple TV has an original series right now called La Maison that's about the fashion industry. And then, of course, YouTube has a million things on it if you want to learn French and learn how to pronounce different things or different letters. You can be following all kinds of people on YouTube who have their little series. And it's great because I think it's opening us up, right? We're becoming this more global society. And for songs, you asked me about songs. I always start my class with a song. Often there's a link to what I'm teaching that day, either the theme or the grammar or something like that. I don't think you can go wrong. If the Olympics opening ceremonies, and if people have not watched them, please find them online and watch it. It was fantastic. But you had Lady Gaga singing a French song. You had this, very emotional return of Celine Dion, who's been suffering from a very debilitating condition, singing Edith Piaf. The classics are great. I think that the way people sang back in the 50s and 40s is very clear, is very easy to understand. The young people out there who love current music and rap, that's great. It's going to be a lot harder to understand at that pace. But, you can look up the lyrics for different things. So I think all the ways that you can immerse yourself, that you're hearing the language on the radio, on Spotify, through a streaming platform, all that's going to help acclimate you to it. And don't feel bad if you've got the English subtitles on. You're still hearing it. You're still absorbing it.
Can you help me with the French R sound? I really struggle with that. Any tips?
So again, there are a million videos out there about how to do it. Yeah, that is definitely hard. I think there are two very hard sounds in French, the R and then the vowel U is also very difficult. So for the R, I think the main tip I have is that it is very much a vibration in your throat. So if you put your fingers on your throat and you are kind of almost clearing your throat and saying, so you're not rolling it, right? It's not a trilled R in Spanish. It's very guttural. It's very much there. So so that sense of just being like, it's not deep in your throat. It's actually rather high in your throat, but that's where it is. So one of the most difficult words is a 3-letter word. It's R-U-E, which is the word for street. So to say rue, right, you have to first. And the U is, again, something I have my students practice, because if they don't master it, it sounds more like ooh, and it can completely change the word that you're saying. There is an R-O-U-E word, but that's not the same. And there are times where your meaning could be very much misconstrued. So practicing that and really getting it in your throat and making sure you can feel the vibration, that's how you get the French R.
Any other common mistakes that beginners make that you can help us with?
Sure. I think one of the main things is that French is a gendered language. And so when I say that, I mean that all nouns are either masculine or feminine. And we don't have that in English. Of course, we have some nouns where if you say actress, you're referring to a woman. But in French, everything from table to chair to door, all of those have been assigned a gender as masculine or feminine. And so I think that that's difficult for English learners because they're not used to needing to learn that along with a word. And I also sometimes beginning students, if it is a female student speaking, they then assume that they will use these female terms, and a male student thinks they're going to use male terms. They're kind of projecting onto their own gender identity, possibly, but it's not about that. The word itself has a gender. So the word for person in French is a feminine word. So if you are describing a person, you have to use feminine adjectives, even if that person you're describing is a man. If you say a man, that's a masculine word, and the adjectives will be masculine. If you're saying, I know a person who is this or that, that's going to be feminine. Given today in the students I have and a lot of people who are looking for more gender neutral terms, that's very difficult. And it's not nearly as advanced in France yet, although there are people, thinking about those questions. But how do you do it when even an object is either masculine or feminine?
I'm a coffee drinker, and some of our listeners might love coffee just as much as I do. And maybe they're traveling to France in the future. Any advice on ordering coffee in France?
First of all, you have, different types of coffee. So if you ask for un café, which is just a typical coffee, you will probably get an espresso. And if you want decaf, which is not as frequent in France, there might be some places that don't have decaf, but if you want decaf, you ask for un déca, which is short for décaffiné, it's like something that's decaffeinated. Typically, in the morning, people will drink coffee with milk, so café au lait, or also another term for that is a café crème. It is considered a little gauche to order any of these drinks with milk in the afternoon, right? That's supposed to be a morning thing. At a cafe, you can order at the counter and stand at the counter, right? Because if people are having an espresso that only takes a minute to drink and on their way somewhere and they're in a hurry, otherwise, you sit down to order. And I always tell people that, first of all, do that. Sit at a cafe. If you can be outside on the terrace, even in cooler weather, they often have heaters and heat lamps and things like that. That's just part of the culture, is to sit and to take your time and to watch people go by. Your waiter or wait person might come back and, ask if you need anything else or if you want anything else. But honestly, you can sit there pretty much as long as you want with just having ordered that one coffee. So it might feel a little expensive, but you're renting a table with a pretty nice view for as long as you want. The wait person might never come back. So this is another thing I would say to keep in mind. If you're there and you're in a hurry, try to give yourself time, because the culture is that you are there to enjoy the people you're with, to enjoy your food, and they're not looking to interrupt that. So you may need to get their attention in order to order something else or in order to pay the bill. And so I've learned to factor in time to get their attention and to get that bill. Sometimes it feels like it's a bit of an art form. The waitstaff is avoiding your gaze and that engagement. In terms of ordering food, again, I've been talking a lot about being polite. First of all, if you don't have a lot of French or even any French, you can point to things on the menu and say, something like just the item, right? Le this or la this. And again, that s'il vous plaît is going to be helpful to add to that. Most people working in restaurants will have, some basic English. So again, if you have that sort of désolé, je ne parle pas français, they'll help you with that. I think the main things are taking your time. The quick in, quick out, turnaround, that's fairly foreign to that culture. I hope people do go. I hope that you take that time and enjoy it. That's part of the culture.
And now some fun get to know our French teacher questions. Do you have a favorite French word and why?
I have a few. So I think my personal favorite is the word for grapefruit in French, which is pamplemousse. And I like it because, and hopefully just even hearing it, there's a little bounciness. That's my favorite French word. And then the French are fascinated by squirrels. When they come to the United States, they take endless photos of squirrels. The English word is hard for them. Squirrel is not an easy word to say. And the French word is écureuil, which is also a difficult word to say. Again, pamplemousse, just because it makes me feel happy and bouncy.
How about a fun or quirky expression?
It's interesting that English and French have a lot of words in common, right? And that goes back to the history and William the Conqueror and all sorts of kings of both of those countries back in the day. And so we use a lot of French in our daily lives that we're, sometimes aware of and sometimes not so aware of. So some of those expressions are because they're hard to translate, or we've just found there's no reason to translate them. So people will talk about savoir-faire, and in economics, one of the principles is laissez-faire. If you make a mistake, it's a faux pas, right? Those are all French terms, and we've just brought those into our language. Some expressions that I like, there was one I just shared with a student the other day. So I asked my students at the beginning of class, especially on Mondays, what did you do over the weekend? Anything interesting? And a student had just shared that she had studied at a cafe, and it was clearly not her typical place to study. And so I said, this is a great opportunity to teach you a French expression, which is se changer les idées. And it literally means that you change your ideas. But the meaning of it and the sense of it is that you do something a little bit different to change up your routine. You do something that's a little bit out of the ordinary for those reasons of clearing your head and that sort of thing. So that's an expression I like a lot, and I find hard to, even as I'm explaining to it, you can tell it's a little hard for me to translate it. Another one, and I've taught a course on the idea of cities and walking through cities, and there's a concept that is very French called the flâneur, and the verb flâner, and that comes from this 19th century idea of the usually man of leisure who would walk through the city without really a purpose and have all the time in the world. That idea, and again, that concept, you sometimes hear in English because we don't have a way to really translate that exactly. The last example I will give right now is I really love how you say that you miss somebody in French. You flip it around. You say that person is missing from you. So when you say I miss you, in French, it's tu me manques or vous me manquez. We can get into the tu vous. Again, I just like that idea because I miss you is putting it, it's about the I, it's about the person speaking and putting the other. Whereas the other, to say like you're missing from me, it's almost like I'm incomplete without you. And so I just like that. I mean, these days people think, why do we need to learn other languages? Well, we need to learn them because different people think about things differently. And in learning their language and how they express themselves, you get a glimpse at how their minds work and how their cultures work.
Talk more about that tu vous distinction.
Sure. So in French, as in a number of languages, there is a formal and an informal you, right? And this we had in English a very long time ago with thee and thou, and it's completely fallen away. So the tu is for informal settings and talking to a single person, and that is usually with close friends and family. You would speak to children using the tu. In certain settings, I was involved a little bit playing basketball in France for a bit, and in the sports world, it's pretty informal. So even people you're meeting for the first time, you might use the tu with because they want to create a more informal setting. Sometimes it's used as an insult. So if you're watching a French TV show and someone has been arrested and the police officer is using tu with them, that's really not respectful, right? That's looking down at the person and treating them as less than their equal. The vous is then, in any case where it's plural, you have to use vous. And then also with one person if you have a more formal relationship with them. So when the Marquis arrives, you're going to want to address him with vous.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. Before we go, can you recap the French greetings we want to have ready to greet the Marquis?
Absolutely. So here's what I would say. So, upon arrival, I would say, Bonjour, Monsieur le Marquis. Then your name. So you would say, to say my name is, it's Je m'appelle, and you give your name. That's where the Marquis is going to say, enchanté, and you repeat the enchanté. And then whatever happens, and at the end, as you're leaving, you would then, again say, merci, au revoir, Monsieur le Marquis. He's going to say the same thing back. But I do think that bonjour, je m'appelle, with your name, and the enchanté are very key. If you want to ask how he is doing, you would say comment allez-vous? If you want to say how you are doing, you would answer with je vais bien, like I'm doing well. Again, I'm assuming everyone's doing well. You're not going to have, hopefully, a bad day that day. And and take it from there. I think you could always start more formal. So if he decides that Monsieur le Marquis is, that's too much, please call me something else, he will let you know. I think that he will be pleased by that respect and that effort to learn a little bit of French. And the Marquis de Lafayette came over here speaking no English, learned our language perfectly, and I'm sure is going to want to practice his English as well.
True.
So you will please him, I think, by having a few words, and then he will run with that and speak his adopted language of English as well.
Well, again, thank you so much. Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Yeah, so the merci beaucoup. Merci à vous. Et à bientôt would be see you soon. So à bientôt.
Thanks again, Carrie. Tune in next month for a brand new episode. For more information on Rockford's Lafayette Day, go to historicrockford.org/special-events. For more information on what's happening across Lancaster and Western Chester counties, go to Lafayette200pa.org. I'm Lisa Landis-Flowers. Thank you so much for listening.